So, Record of Ragnarok is not just your typical tournament arc. Here on the battlegrounds of Valhalla, humanity has been asked to prove themselves or witness their extinction by the gods themselves. Yet, humanity isn't alone, both in battle and in word. Some celestial beings, like the Valkyries, fight on the side of humanity under their leader, the eldest Valkyrie Brunhild. But there is one who not only chose to fight for humanity, but declared that he would kill any god who stood in his path.
神が救わぬなら俺が救う。邪魔する神は俺がやる。
Who is this guy? This is the Honored One, the only strongest in both heaven and earth, Buddha. But wait, why would Buddha, one of the most important and recognizable gods in all of history, suddenly switch sides like it was a stroll on a Sunday afternoon? Wouldn't it go against his position as, well, a god? Well, to answer that question, let's delve into the story of the Buddha. Let's set the record straight here. I am pulling from sources that expand upon some of the great lessons that helped shape Buddha's character, but the focus is on the character arc and narrative that Record of Ragnarok has presented. The ideas I'll bring up are meant to expand on what's already been said in Ragnarok. Also, there's some ancient names I'll be pronouncing. I'll do my best, but my apologies in advance if they don't sound right. Anyways, the gods of Record of Ragnarok are not your typical gods. Every single mythology known to mankind is real, but there is no grand unifying force that keeps them all in line, at least as far as we know. There's gods higher than others though, forming a sort of government council between their most powerful and influential. Gods are obviously blessed with unbelievable abilities and have command over domains, fitting their monikers like the God of Destruction or the God of the Seas. But they also grow and develop in the same vein of humans, though their lifespans are on a far grander scale. We see critical points in the legends of these gods, fulfilling duties and destinies seemingly all set in stone for them from the very beginning. We see how they come to be who they are now, immortal, and how their lives have served as that stepping stone towards immortality. But not everyone was born a god immediately. Enter a kingdom in ancient central Nepal. This civilization would soon witness its next great ruler, Gautama Siddhartha. His father, King Suddhodana, ensured that Gautama would be favored. Indeed, he was, even according to divine fortune. A fortune teller prophesied that Gautama would be a ruler, not just of the kingdom, but of the world. Gautama's life was of privilege and prestige. He truly had everything one could ask for. But he was also a good man, giving of his wealth to the people freely. He was an inspiration, a beacon of promises. His destiny as a great ruler seemed highly likely, and where tragedy would strike now, in order to balance things out, there was no hubris or terrible backstory. One day, he visited Mala, one of the ancient northern kingdoms, to see his cousin, the king Jataka. Gautama would soon become king of his own realm, while Jataka, plagued by an illness, would soon pass to the next life. Gautama figured that Jataka should be happy. He's done well as a king and helped his kingdom prosper. But in his last few moments, Jataka proclaimed the opposite. He wondered what his life truly was, an entire life spent on behalf of people he served in a world he never got to see, whose beauties he never experienced. In his own words, he never got to reach for his own happiness. For Jataka to admit that his life was unfulfilling and unhappy, it was an eye-opener to Gautama. Gautama, who believed that happiness had been derived from doing his part and living up to his duties, was shaken. He's always lived up to the expectations and responsibilities that come with his countless blessings. In his eyes, his path was already predetermined. That is what he believed, that he would become king and prosper the people. It was his destiny. On his way to Jataka's funeral, Gautama reflected on the words and probably the life of his fallen brother as well. Without a doubt, there were likely many things running through his mind. The cycle of life and death, the purpose of life, the expectations of life, the experiences of life. Would Gautama's life, like Jataka's, end up unfulfilled? A mere husk of what it could be? What was his destiny? Was he merely a puppet? Was his life actually his own? As he continued to reflect, the people around him mourned, one of them thinking that Jataka had been very happy. And something inside of Gatama clicked. We are shown these experiences that Jataka had, beautiful or not, and yet his life ended up in his own unfulfilled poverty. In this moment of deep reflection, Gatama's eyes were opened yet again. And he began to laugh. For Gatama had found enlightenment. He would no longer live a life that was placed upon him. He would make his own. While the mourners believed that Jataka's life concluded as it should have, Gatama, throwing flowers into the air, arrived and began to carry the casket out of the funeral. His own father and the priest overlooking the funeral remarked that the gods would curse him for his shameful behavior. Gatama responded sharply. After giving his fallen brother one last farewell, Gatama set out. He cast aside all worldly things, including his wealth, his privileges, his family, even the fate promised to him by the gods themselves. He would choose his own path. He would find fulfillment through his decisions, his experiences. In his eyes, it was now all up to him, and he would make sure of that no matter what. His destiny was his to create and his to claim. Along the way, Gatama's stubbornness and boldness would earn him followers. Gatama's new life and experiences would lead to the founding of a major world religion, Buddhism, and from here, a path of light was open to all who followed his example. Gone was his worldview that destiny is fixed on a linear path, that things are as they are because they simply will be, or because these gods said so. His personal philosophy advocated for personal intervention and personal choice, especially when it comes to principles that can unlock enlightenment. So, what are some of the key principles that Gatama practiced? Here is a segment I want to call There are 3 principles that I can list from observation: self-mastery, happiness, and choice. Now the main focus is on what is shown in Ragnarok, but again, I'll be referring to outside sources that expand upon the ideas introduced. Gatama, now Buddha, was introduced as having detached himself from the world. But I think the better term to describe this is self-mastery, and that starts with personal liberation from worldly attachments. Yes, he may have ascended beyond the world, but Buddha still finds joy in simple worldly and material things like candy, popcorn, and relaxing. I believe that the kind of freedom he worked towards and mastered came from overcoming and surpassing the limitations and consequences brought about by worldly excess, not unlike principles of Buddhism which encourage restraint and rejection of bodily pleasures and appetites. Buddhist teachings talk about this word, which means fuel or cause. It's tied to this other word, which refers to cravings. Taking a step back, these cravings and causes can, even at a simple level, refer to things that can hold someone back from enlightenment. The basis of what that means is this: that finding pleasure for the body or mind can lead to a sort of personal stain on the consciousness, one that corrupts who we believe we are, or what it is that we want. To this end, materialistic things often do serve a purpose. Buddha shared food with a starving man because he was in need of it. It is when a necessity becomes an obsession that we lose sight of our ultimate goals. That is a significant part of reaching enlightenment, to acknowledge the purpose behind such things, but to not grow so attached to them to the point where our worldly desires, appetites, and egos override and even twist our natures just to accommodate for such temporary pleasures. While Buddha isn't materialistic, he's also shown with rather flashy attire and with a love for sweets. In this case, self-mastery is about knowing what he wants and holding himself to a degree of discipline and awareness to be able to achieve that. In the same vein, it is this strength of will that has helped him to become a god beyond the other gods. How so? Well, Buddha is accountable first and only to himself. He follows what he believes in, and he chooses for himself what he wants. There can be no one else who can command the honored one of earth and heaven in the record of Ragnarok. Because of this self-mastery, his conviction is unbreakable. What may seem like stubbornness is actually just him refusing to compromise his values just because this guy or this guy is a god or because they think they know better. Next, there's happiness. This Buddha taught about happiness and purpose, and it was never in the very things he had left behind all those years ago. Misery and pleasure brings about corruption that quells physical appetites, while leaving the spirit entirely in want. In other words, true happiness can't and won't be found from others or in things. There is a joy that comes from being with others, and there's certainly good vibes from, say, a chocolate cake. But what Buddha taught is that happiness comes from within, or that rather we have the potential of happiness already inside of us, and it's up to us to exercise and discover that happiness. This Buddha quotes,
目覚めし人曰く、君は幸福を望むというのか？されば自らにふさわしい重荷を背負え、それこそ喜びを生じる境地、やがて幸福を生む影である。
In other words, in facing adversity, one discovers the happiness they yearn for, finding greater purpose from the often difficult lessons they learn in the opposition they face. The shadow, then, is the opposition necessary for our growth, as long as we choose to do our part and diligently work towards overcoming it. This creates joy and gives us personal experience. The troubles and trials we face may actually end up being the exact stepping stones needed to promote growth, be it physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. And it starts with choice. As Jataka once lamented, there were many things that he had not yet experienced for himself. Not because he couldn't, but because he never did. Buddha found his happiness in doing what he wanted. I can only speculate what he might have done in the short time we saw his backstory in Ragnarok, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was able to experience even more joy in surpassing his physical appetites, mental and emotional shortcomings, and so on. But he made that choice, even when others disapproved of it. He defied old traditions and expectations based on the status quo because he chose his path. It was not forced upon him by impulse or circumstances. All things he does are deliberately his choice. Having practiced that for eons, his personal ability to choose is best reflected now in his nonchalant perspective and mellow attitude. It could be that as he witnessed the envy and the judgments of human beings, Buddha saw something inside of their spirits that yearned to feel the happiness they saw in other people, like him. Not only could this reinforce his new values, it likely would have energized him to be more enthusiastic about sharing it with others. His good-hearted nature translated over into a religious path that others genuinely followed. They took after the Buddha because he was different. Here was a man who knew something, and Buddha was a selfless person. Although he could not offer happiness, because his happiness is his own, he could help others discover happiness for themselves. So that was what Buddha exemplified, at least from what I understood. But let's go over his characterization, which is both very amusing and quite inspirational.
ブーちゃん、それは私のことですか？釈迦様。
And nowhere is this better represented than in his battle against Serofuku, the god of misfortune. But let's take a step back before entering one of the most absurd fights in all of Ragnarok. So, the sum total of Buddha's journey and philosophy has, in short, made him a highly confident, self-assured, bold, and mellow individual, tied down only to and by himself. Now, what Buddha is not is self-righteous. It may seem like it, given how he carries himself as the only honored one in earth and heaven, but it's actually more in the realm of self-confidence. Self-righteousness is the holier-than-thou, the attitude born from the belief that one is morally superior in virtue, deed, and belief to others, usually while turning a blind eye to their own personal shortcomings. Yes, Buddha stands stubbornly by what he believes. But then consider basically everyone else, especially these gods. Godly society in the record of Ragnarok is apparently highly advanced both in its people and its civilization. While the humans are naturally imperfect, the gods hold themselves to such a high degree, their egos are practically oozing out of them just the moment you look at them. Many of the gods think themselves supreme, entitled to worship and putting down others, especially humans, in order to assert and establish their authority. Exceptions to this include gods like Hercules and Buddha. Buddha himself is not perfect. Like all the other gods, he's far from the perfection that a god, especially a god of worship, is supposed to be. But while other gods lord their heavenly status like a walking red flag, Buddha keeps to himself and does what he wants without having to deprive others of the same opportunities that he has both as a god and had when he was a human. Buddha only really displays a holier-than-thou attitude when he's around other gods, especially ones like Odin and Zeus. And I can't help but feel that this is not just Buddha holding himself above the gods, but rather staying aloof from their brand of arrogance. While they might believe that they are better than the humans, Buddha, who was once human, knows that he has become better, is better, and will do better. Although Buddha seems mellow to a fault, it is because, as mentioned before, he's mastered his imperfections, rather than letting insecurities be the foundation for his conviction and character. In short, he knows who he is and what he wants, and there's a difference in the way he interacts with others. To someone like Zeus, he's petty. But to someone like Brunhild, he's fairly chill, even if he knows how imperfect even she might be, even if she doesn't want to admit it. Becoming a deity only strengthened his resolve and his stance towards fate and destiny. This Buddha hates the imposition of destiny on the free will of humanity. He's quite opposed to the gods for this very reason. Ragnarok itself is meant to be a contest on the basis that should humanity fail, the gods will eradicate them. Naturally, Buddha would stand his ground on this matter, leading to his betrayal of the gods. Brunhild describes Buddha as living the ultimate adolescent life, described as always living in his peak. And part of the reason she says that is because, as she puts it, he hates being told what to do. Buddha lived through what is described as the strongest puberty in history. In a time of intense emotional, mental, and physical growth and transition, the Buddha was able to find the right vibes for his own life and stick to his guns even after ascending to godhood. Let's not forget that he achieved all of this on his own and for himself. His destiny came about through his choices, not because he lived up to a fate that was transmitted to him on account of circumstances, his abilities, etc. But Buddha is not a machine nor emotionless. In attaining enlightenment, Buddha does not show detachment in the way you think he would. If anything, just the opposite. This Buddha, although full of swagger and, to an extent, petty antics, is far more grounded than even the Valkyries. In fact, let's see what grounded actually means. Sensible, realistic, mentally and emotionally stable, admirably sensible, realistic, and unpretentious. Remains grounded despite all the praise and attention. This description could seem ironic, seeing as how Buddha not only defied the will of the gods by changing sides, he verbally declared that he would outright destroy anyone who stood in his path. Which, said from anyone else, is asking for a death wish. But this is Buddha we're talking about. The enlightened one achieved godhood through his own journey. He doesn't need approval from others in order to take action, and he wasn't about to let outside noise dictate what was best for him. In fact, all things are fleeting to this Buddha. Nothing matters more to him than what he wants to do.
しつこいな。だからさっき言っただろ。敵とか味方とか
善人悪人神人間全部関係ない。この宇宙で俺はただ俺だから。
And this mellow attitude carries over into his weapon, the Staff of the Six Realms.
陸道
In Buddhist lore, the Six Realms are demi-planes that help shape the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In Ragnarok, the staff is a powerful divine treasure that changes its shape and purpose based on Buddha's emotions. It can turn into a shield, a sword, and so on.
お前か。突っ込めってことね。いや
And while Buddha has ascended to godhood, he still retains in him a genuinely good-hearted nature. Though he's not tied to his status as a king, he certainly acts graceful to those he deems worthy of his compassion. He saved this young girl from being offered up as a human sacrifice, and he remained selfless even as he began to lead a major religion. He's altruistic, but obviously he has personal limits and standards. Remember, he's quite petty to the gods, who would bring down judgment on humanity. But he's not so brash as to wave this red flag constantly. Rather, if the gods didn't like what he did, he could care less. Like when Loki confronted him over his betrayal, and Buddha showed no signs of fear or sentiment to a fellow god.
直入に聞くね。君って裏切り者？だったら何？殺す。
That said, let's cover his matchup. In Record of Ragnarok, two tropes are used in combination to create a theme that fits each fight, using the trope of the backstory before the big fight and the trope of the tournament arc. For example, Poseidon, the most godly of the gods, fights Kojiro Sasaki, history's greatest loser. For Buddha, the enlightened one who guided humanity through darkness, is faced against his opposite. This is the 7 Japanese gods of fortune, who fused to become their original form, Zerofuku, who would take happiness away from humanity should he ever step foot on the earth. Consider Zerofuku the foil to Buddha. Buddha's example guided humanity through the darkness of their own earthly desires, which more or less equates to the spiritual concept of sin, which brings shame, guilt, and suffering. It is because of the enlightenment that Buddha helped to cultivate in the earth that people found greater purpose beyond their wants and pleasures. Indeed, humanity was able to elevate themselves and find greater satisfaction beyond materialistic things and their own personal excess. Buddha helped them to discover their own measure of true happiness. Buddha was a human who achieved a great aspect of godhood, which is to stand above and master the imperfections of humanity. As for Zerofuku, he descended down to earth during a time of close relations between gods and humans. He truly sought to bring happiness and fortune to the world. He did this by taking on the suffering of humanity, in his eyes, cutting off the sources of anguish that plagued humanity. And there's nothing wrong with this. By basically being their martyr, taking on the suffering of the humans, Zerofuku was doing the right thing, and he felt joy as a result. However, he never understood what happiness and love were for himself, or rather, he never had those things deep within him. Sound familiar? And by only taking away the suffering and offering up nothing more, humanity was never in a place to improve upon themselves. In fact, they became depraved, losing sight of the pursuit of true happiness. This was humanity's choice. It is actually in this time that Zerofuku first met Buddha, who showed him the higher way. Zerofuku, or even Buddha for that matter, could not give happiness. It sounds weird, but think about it like this. If the soul never wanted happiness, then even the greatest offer of happiness would only be indulged in. And indulgence is a sin most miserable. Buddha notes that there are opposites, light and shadow, and both serve a purpose. As mentioned earlier, adversity can bring forth joy and personal experience. Buddha declares that happiness is something you give to yourself. You can't force it on others.
与えられるもんじゃないんだよ。自分で
Zerufuku had to understand that he was using his powers far past his own limits. Yes, it provided temporary relief to the humans, but he gave up so much of himself that now both he and the humans were miserable. He had not developed the discipline to be able to keep himself healthy and persistent in his goals while still being capable of administering to the people. Overdoing it, even to himself, was excessive, not progressive. Zerufuku, apparently humiliated, fled. In his grieving, the anguish turned to hatred, and hatred transformed the kindly god to a demon. Yet his own mercy would not be snuffed out so easily. When he went berserk, Zero was just capable of splitting himself into 7 individual deities, the 7 gods of fortune. Fractured, they still had a duty to fulfill, to bring fortune to humanity. But they could never forget the spite they felt towards Buddha, nor the misfortune they suffered on behalf of the seemingly hell-bent human race. And thus, when they returned to one, the same Zerufuku returned, ready to inflict, in his eyes, divine punishment. But Buddha's own discipline and self-mastery would make the Honored One untouchable. His ability allows him to see the movements of the soul. His understanding of the soul had been so great that he could now predict how the soul would take action before its physical body would follow. So, while Zerufuku's ability to absorb misfortune kept feeding and growing his catastrophe, yes, that's the real name of his weapon, Buddha was unfazed. All in all, Zerufuku was doing all the harm to himself. His caustic and rather immature perspective on life was filled with self-pity. And Buddha knew that. It takes a couple of hits and graceful patience from Buddha for him to easily turn the tide, as well as show Zero the path of light. His hatred turned back to that optimism that first carried him to help humanity. It was a new day for the young god. Or would have been. When Papias. Okay, I can't be the only one who thought that was papaya, right? Well, look at that. With that name in bulk, he looks like a Dragon Ball villain. Anyways, when Papias, also known as Heijun, emerged as another combatant, Buddha stood his ground against what is basically another foil to him. Heijun had destroyed himself in the past because his body could not withstand his growing power. Similar to Zero, who could not fully realize the potential of his purpose because of his naivete and envy. Because of this emo-L-looking god, Heijun's essence was stored inside of Zero, festering until he could take over the god's body. Like Zero, Heijun imposes his judgment onto Buddha, claiming absolute power as the demon king of the sixth heaven. In fact, he's not so different from Buddha when it comes to their characteristics and strengths. Both are very self-assured, very self-confident in themselves, their beliefs, and their power, and both consider themselves supreme beings above all others. However, the difference was all the same. Heijun had not matured properly. In Buddha's own words, Heijun had not gone through puberty. In other words, Heijun was powerful, but lacked that personal discipline and conviction that would make him truly supreme. On top of that, Buddha was faced with yet another deity imposing fate onto others. Actually, Heijun coming about was incidental, as El Yagami here had taken his leftover essence, cultivated it, planted it in Zero, then waited for his predetermined destiny to play out, which was his bloody rebirth. So, it's actually 2 deities toying with fate, even within their own ranks. It is during this battle that Buddha again displays his self-mastery. His staff transforms once more into a wicked scythe, using the emotion of hatred, deemed poisonous by Buddha himself. Buddha defeats Heijun, to keep it simple. Heijun's soul was completely dark, rendering Buddha's clairvoyance useless, but there was still a soul, and Buddha, being his classic sarcastic adolescent self, is able to reactivate his divine power after making Heijun doubt his chances of victory. It was as though Heijun needed Buddha to be scared and willing to lose for him to win. But Buddha, being Buddha, didn't need anything from Heijun. He would create his own path, find his own advantages, and claim ultimate victory on his own. It's Buddha's conviction powering him to success. With Zero's power, Buddha crafts another Volundor, the great Nirvana sword Zero. And with it, and his clairvoyance reactivated, he sends the Demon King back to damnation. The supposed ultimate being, the monster who no god could possibly beat, was bested. Not solely because of Buddha, but because even he could not control his own emotions, thus giving all momentum and all power to the one who has mastered them. Ragnarok's unique setting and method of storytelling through combat enables the audience to understand the legacies of those who enter the ring and those who depart from it towards their ultimate end. Hercules, although a god, proclaims his love for humanity even as he perishes, while the human warlord Lubu accepts his defeat, having finally found a worthy opponent in Thor. Even in defeat, gods and humans pay tribute to those who have fallen, even if that means through hatred and jeering. Until more characters begin unveiling their deepest schemes, everyone is technically a protagonist, waiting for their goals to be met. Buddha, being a wild card, is respected, hated, looked up to, and looked down at all the same, after all is said and done. He's helped humanity gain an unexpected edge when the gods expected another easy win. But more importantly, he's shown that not only can he best a god easily, he can defeat even someone like Heijun, who the gods doubted they could handle on their own. Heijun even being there was part of another scheme by another deity, so I don't even think that the gods would have wanted him representing them in the first place, regardless of how efficient and powerful he is. Most importantly, he's displayed first and foremost the power of his convictions, that a literal self-made god could not only defeat a demon, but educate a fellow deity. Buddha is simply built different, and now everyone knows that for certain. It seems that this sassy and classy sap is truly one of a kind, truly a supreme one, a ruler of all the world and an exemplar to even the gods. But I'm not the one writing the story. There's already so many plots and schemes beneath all the actual fights that, at this point, true victory won't be won on the battlefield of Ragnarok. Who knows, maybe Buddha may have to step up once again to not only point humanity towards a better future, but to also remind the gods of the potential of the humans. The same potential that could lead souls like Gatama and Hercules to achieve the glory of the heavens. Humanity, being full of imperfections, is the perfect engine for progress and enlightenment, choice and conflict, success and tribulation. But Buddha proved that you don't even have to be a prince, a king, or even a god to unlock and live up to your own potential. So, what is the legacy of Buddha? Well, it's to find happiness now, to appreciate the good things in life now, and to follow your own dreams now. Become capable and disciplined as you chase your goals. Find meaning in adversity, and along the way, share it with a friend. Share it with others. Walk the path you walk together. In unlocking enlightenment, one can surpass limits and temporary pleasures. One can reach even as far as the superhuman gods when they have mastered their very soul. In short, Buddha's legacy is that of becoming more, living more, being more. And it starts and ends with you.